G'day, May 40 here. So I've been going back and forth on the tactic of libs of TikTok, who republishes people who have publicly wished that the sniper had a more accurate shot on Donald Trump and actually killed him. And so just publicizing the people who have publicly stated that on social media, and then these people usually ending up getting fired. So if you do nothing when people publicly wish for the assassination of the future president and past president of the United States, right, you're acquiescing to this kind of behavior, which would only encourage it. So what libs of TikTok is doing by fighting back and publicizing those who wish that the sniper had taken out Donald Trump, all right, they are adding to the social price to be paid for wishing for Donald Trump's assassination. And it's not just Donald Trump, right? It could very easily become various members of MAGA, right? Donald Trump is not hated just overwhelmingly because of Donald Trump, but he is hated for his embodiment of a certain traditional approach to life. It's unfiltered. It's not part of the careful, critical discourse that dominates our elites. And so how do you punish people who do horrible things? For example, attacking the police. I'm happy for people on January 6th who attacked police to go to prison, and I'd like the pro-Hamas demonstrators who attacked police yesterday in the nation's capital for them also to go to prison.
Today, we face a choice between two very different visions for our nation. One focused on the future, and the other focused on the past. And we are fighting for the future.
Wow, that's brave. She's fighting for the future.
America is at a crossroads, and the parties have made it perfectly clear what they stand for. Donald Trump represents the party of patriotism, while Kamala Harris represents the party of chaos. The new pro-Hamas Summer of Love touched down in D.C. yesterday and wreaked havoc across the Capitol, and it was all in honor of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's arrival. Is this what America will look like during a Kamala Harris presidency?
Right, so conservatives are much more likely to believe that the flag is real. It's not just a symbol, but what it represents as far as in our neural circuit activation is real, right? The flag evokes real flesh and blood feelings for people, and therefore it's not just a symbol, and therefore destroying it should be a crime because you're inflicting real harm on people who place their hopes and their aspirations on the flag. Right, and so those American Jews who are the most horrified by this flag burning, right, they are also the most Zionist. So the most Zionist American Jews are also the most likely to be American nationalists. So Jews in the United States who are nationalists with regard to Israel also tend to overwhelmingly be American nationalists and to support the erection of a border wall to protect the southern United States from illegal immigration.
Burning American flags, desecrating landmarks, cheering on deadly terrorist groups, and attacking police officers. Wow, that's what happened in our nation's capital. And Congressman Brian Mast, a combat veteran who lost both his legs in Afghanistan, was so sickened by what he saw that he wrote this. Quote, "I fought and bled for the American flag. My friends lost their lives in battle for the American flag. And when they come home, the American flag was draped over their caskets. Yet the people Kamala Harris is courting burn the American flag. Shame on them." Protesters, listen to this. They even released maggots at the Watergate Hotel where Netanyahu and the Israeli delegation were staying.
نروح من الارض نطلع زي جن بخ هدي اللعب على هذا نترك على النار الافكار تطبخ اختراق ورا حدا إذا بلغ أنا مش مركب بركبش مع حدا أنا فين إن أمكانيك البلد بالبقلك ديك.
Now, as these left-wing activists
Right. Do these activists really think they're going to generate American support for this behavior?
took over D.C.,
So they're burning the American flag, right, and they're going after Israel. They are conflating the United States with Israel, which makes sense because these two nations are allies. But those Americans who care about America are not going to be thrilled by this.
where was Kamala Harris? She wasn't in attendance for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress, and that's even though she's the president of the Senate. You know, some would call that a snub. And then as violent protests raged through D.C., condemnations came in from the White House, from both sides of the political aisle. But it took Vice President Kamala Harris almost 24 hours to issue just a paper statement condemning the, quote, despicable acts by unpatriotic protesters. Almost a day. Vice President Kamala Harris has her own press corps. She could have spoken to them in real time, but she didn't. On her trip back from Indiana, she could have just walked to the back of Air Force Two, made a verbal condemnation. She did not. She passed reporters at Joint Base Andrews. She could have walked over and said something. She didn't. Kamala Harris had every opportunity to condemn these protesters.
Right. So this is why Donald Trump and his campaign have framed it around the theme of restoring order. Right. That kind of raucous attacking cops, burning the American flag. It creates disorder, which then makes more heinous crimes more likely.
On camera, but she made a deliberate choice not to. We got a paper statement. That's it. And after meetings with Netanyahu today, the vice president went in front of the cameras to condemn hate on all sides.
Let us all.
Okay, something interesting happened in the Christopher Wray hearing yesterday. So listen to this.
In 2016 and 2015, top FBI officials infamously texted about, quote, their insurance policy to make sure Trump was never elected or inaugurated as president. Have any FBI agents texted, emailed, or expressed disappointment that Trump survived the assassination attempt or otherwise editorialized about the assassination attempt?
I don't know about any agents. There have been at least two instances, I think, or one instance of an individual who posted something that I consider outrageous and totally inappropriate and unacceptable. And that individual has been referred to our inspection division, which is the arm, our sort of internal affairs investigatory arm that does the disciplinary process.
Okay. Will you report back to this committee any other incidents?
I'll do my best to share information with the committee.
You test in 20.
So, to the extent that I believe there might have been a conspiracy behind the shooting of Donald Trump last Saturday, I think it was likely someone who was disgruntled about Donald Trump, and it wouldn't surprise me that they were in the Secret Service or the FBI, or part of our national security industrial complex.
I thought it was embarrassing, Kaylee. You know, the fact is that Kamala Harris wants to be president of the United States. She had the opportunity to show that she could be a leader yesterday by not only presiding over Benjamin Netanyahu's joint session of Congress address, but by very clearly and unequivocally condemning in real time.
So I don't believe all these stories about multiple shooters. I think they're ridiculous. So the only extent to which I believe in a conspiracy to take down Donald Trump last Saturday night, it's someone disgruntled within the Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security or the FBI, and that they deliberately created space for something horrible to happen to Donald Trump. So this is an example of why I don't believe any of the conspiracy theories about multiple shooters. They just don't hold up.
Well, no, that's where the police were. They were in there. And there was open windows all the way around that building because I guess because they don't want to shoot through a closed window if they need to take out a bad guy, right? So the question is, well, then why didn't they see him when he crawled up on the roof? So I have a theory here that maybe they couldn't see him because their view was obstructed. So take a look at this. So when I look at a frame grab here from Action 4 News in Pittsburgh that clearly shows all of the windows open. Now, we don't know where all of the cops were or how many there were upstairs here. Maybe there was one or two, maybe more. I don't know. But let's just say for the sake of argument, out in front of this whole Butler Farms area. Check this out.
All right, and this is Jeff Ostroff, and his channel has been the best on the details of the Trump assassination.
Either of these buildings, rooftops, could have been used by a sniper as well, because they had a direct line straight down the field to where Trump was speaking right up at the end here. So that could have been a spot too. But anyway, what I want to focus on is the building. See, there it is, and there's our famous water tower, a couple of 100 feet behind it. But if you look here, let's say the snipers were in any one of these windows here, the police snipers. Could they have seen him on this part of the roof shimmying up? Now, we know why the Secret Service snipers couldn't see him right away, because they're way over on this side, and he's just shimmying up the roof, and he didn't raise his head until the last second when he put the gun up and then took the shots, like instantly. They couldn't make a proactive strike. They had to do a reactive strike. But if the police were in these windows right here, are they at the right height to be able to look in there and see? Let's try from a slightly different angle back here on the main road. I'm going to come right over here. Move over a little bit, see if we can't see it. Okay, so here's the level of the windows right here on the second floor. And it looks like, yes, they should have been able to look over to see him. What I can't do, though, is get close enough up to the building right in front of it to see the projection there of the air conditioning duct that's on the side of the building. This morning I sat in on a live stream from Dr. Chris Martinson. He's from Peak Prosperity, and he had some couple of really good theories about audio that I wanted to run by you too, and we'll take a look at these. So one of the audio issues he pointed out here with these all of these recordings we have of the gunshots is, why do, like, for example, the first 3 gunshots sound different than the second 5, that burst of 5? So you have pow, 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 and then you have pow, 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 pow. Why does these 3 sound different than these 5 here? So take a look at this.
Pretty reliable.
It's going to point over here now.
All that. So this is where this next piece was. So see if you hear the difference between those first 3 shots and those next 5, given that we're in an entirely different location, because maybe the location had something to do with it. Maybe. So let's start there. And
these are the shots.
Here we go. First, we're just going to look at the whole the video, and then we'll just listen to the sound file.
I'll direct you to them.
Okay, we don't need to listen to too much of the screaming, but because there's quite a bit of it. So again, there's a tree over to the left with some buildings. As they swing past this way, you can see there's another tree, and then there's a 2-story building, and then the flat building, which looks like a long, low, sheddy kind of a roof kind of a thing. Let's look at that one more time. He's got to go on the roof. Okay. So the position of this roof, plus you heard that crack, that tells us pretty much where we are. And again, we're right about here. We're under it.
Okay, so let's take a listen here. There's your 3 shots. And then there's the 5. They do sound a little different. Let's go back again and see what happened. Here we're under a tree. Now we're turning the camera.
Okay, so I don't believe that there was any connection between the shooter and anyone else to facilitate the assassination. What I am open to, it's possible that one person or 2 people in Trump's Secret Service detail, or some party in the Secret Service or Department of Homeland Security, all right, deliberately arranged the most inept protection detail for Donald Trump for this rally, thereby creating space for something like the assassination to take place. So I don't believe any of the conspiracy theories. I simply believe it's possible that one person, right, or possibly even 2 people somewhere in the Secret Service or Department of Homeland Security ensured that Donald Trump did not have adequate security, just creating space for this type of assassination attempt. And in an investigation, if this was true, we'd probably find other examples where Donald Trump was deliberately starved of necessary security resources. We know that the Biden administration repeatedly has turned down Trump campaign security requests over the past 2 years.
See, so it's a completely different angle from what we had just a few seconds ago. So if we rewind it back to the beginning again, and I just want to show you what's going on, look at the difference in angle from where we started to where we ended. Okay. So at the beginning, we were under the tree, and we're facing the parking lot, the front parking lot, way over here, see? So all of these people were just kind of camped out under these line of trees here. And then as you watch, as the camera tilts all the way around to the right, it's going to pan. And then here is the 2-story part of the building. This is where the police were supposedly in here, the snipers. And then our shooter is way over here at the other end of this building. Okay. And then it gets over to here when you start to hear the other 5. Okay, so let's take a look at that angle. So you can see here that there's a huge difference in angle. We're going to take a look at this in a second to see like exactly where it was and what that angle is. But let me just show you how different mics can sound. So here's my voice here. And if I even go back and come back all the way over here, I probably sound different. And I probably sound different if I come around to the side of the microphone here. So this type of mic that I'm using, this dynamic mic from Shrier, it's an SM7B. This is supposed to be my mouth within a couple of inches. That's what the instructions say. I have to be right here in order for it to sound correctly. And so if I change my location, it's going to sound different. It might not sound as full. It might not be as loud. I'm back here now. You might get some echo. Who knows? But you can see just by moving slightly how the sound changes. Okay. So if we go and take a look at that now, we estimate that the person was standing here and they were shooting through the trees. And this was that big one-story building with the parking lot in the background. This is where they were. So they were shooting this direction. They hear the shooting and then immediately turn the camera around going this way to try to see where it was coming from. And at this point, you could see the front edge of this two-story building here, like I showed you. And then the edge, they're looking edge on this building. So that's a very wide angle. You're talking almost 180-degree difference. See, so here they are looking through that line of trees, and that one-story building is in the background, and the parking lot for that AGR building is over here. That's a smaller parking lot. And you can see there's the parking lot right there. And everybody here along these trees has their cameras focused over there on that building. That's why he's turning around now. This guy's going to turn around. So I would love to see all of the cell phone video from every one of these people. I'm surprised they haven't published it yet or put it online, but I want to get the original files. So now he's going to turn the camera around. See, and there's the front face of the building, like I mentioned. See, he's looking back at it right here. And then he's zeroing in on...
So none of the videos, none of the theories alleging multiple shooters have the smallest amount of credibility to me.
On the building, he's going to hear the 5 shots. And he's trying to turn around because he knows the shooter is on top of this building. And when he steps back behind the tree, you can see everybody else has their cameras up and pointed right in that same direction. So this proves pretty much that it's a huge, wide swinging angle.
And there was nothing magical about the so-called magic bullet in the John F. Kennedy assassination. All right, the first shot completely missed John F. Kennedy. The second shot went through his throat, and then given that I think Lee Harvey Oswald shot from the 7th floor of the book depository building, it then had the exact projection and flight that you would expect ending up in John Connolly's chest. And then the third shot was the kill shot that took out much of John F. Kennedy's head. So all the talk about magic bullet doing all these weaves and waves. No, the bullet exactly went as you would expect when shot from the 7th floor of the book depository against JFK.
And when you have almost 180 degrees difference here in direction that you're shooting at, who knows how it's going to sound? Of course it's going to sound different. Plus, the guy had originally, it looks like he moved out from under the tree and then came back in again. He was moving back under the tree for protection. So, of course, the audio is going to sound different at that point. Okay, so now that we have pretty much established that the bullet came from this direction, from the shooter, and everything jives here. There's nothing here that you can say that doesn't match what I'm telling you. Everything happened as it happened. So now let's take a look at this angle here. So some people think that there's a lot of people actually that have this conspiracy theory that there was snipers in this building here that took him out. Like they're accusing the police basically of doing it, which I think is just, it's stupid, it's rude, and it's just, there's really no basis for it. But we'll go ahead and take a look at it anyway. So if there was a shooter in this room, this is the red arrow here. That would be from their sniper angle. And you could see nothing adds up here, okay? Because from this angle, you would be hitting Trump in the forehead. You wouldn't be hitting him in the ear. It would be hitting him in the forehead. And you would take out a couple of people back in here at the back end of the grandstand. And that's not what happened. The shot that rang out took out people on this far corner of the grandstand here on the right-hand side. The yellow line is the current proposed shooting line that everybody so far mainstream agrees. And this is what I agree. This conspiracy theory line right here, I don't agree with this at all. In fact, just looking at that line, it doesn't even pass the common sense test. Now let's just entertain, once again, another conspiracy theory that a lot of people were saying that you got the shooter, that there was another sniper on top of the water tower, a couple of 100 yards away. So here's our conspiracy theory sniper. And right off the bat, I'm already suspicious whether they could even see through these trees. I believe these trees had it obstructed, because remember, you're up high, but you're not really up that high. It's not even 100 feet up. These trees are pretty tall. And whether you have line of sight through these trees is debatable at this point. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that a sniper up here could see. And he comes all the way down here, shoots Trump with the bullet. And at this angle, the bullet is not just going to graze Trump's ear. It's going to go through his ear and through the back of his skull and kill Trump. Okay, Trump is still alive, so we know that that didn't happen. And then something else that's not jiving here is, remember, our 2 shooting victims over here that were injured but survived were right back here on the back end of the right bleachers. So according to this bullet here, that doesn't happen. That's simply not the case. And then, of course, you don't get the hydraulic hose being taken out, which should be somewhere around over here on the boom lift. Okay, so nothing on the conspiracy theories bullet path here makes sense. However, again, the shooter being right here where we know they found his body, that does totally make sense right here. Okay, so it goes this way. So remember, his gun was found right here. He was found about 6 feet this way from the gun, but he likely fired from where the gun was. Either that, or he was firing from here and then threw the gun and it landed 6 feet away. And then he tried to get away, but then was shot by the Secret Service. So again, another one here that does not pass the common sense test. I think we have now debunked the fact that there was no conspiracy theory sniper on top of the water tower. And shame on those Congress people today at the hearing where Kimberly Cheel from the Secret Service was.
Yeah, so those bizarre conspiracy theories, multiple gunmen, just don't stand up to common sense. All right, Miranda Devine has an important essay in the New York Post. Local cops increasingly refusing to share information with the FBI as the FBI suffers crisis of confidence with DEI hires, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion hires. Damning whistleblower report reveals. FBI Director Chris Wray performed his usual tsunami stonewalling in Congress Wednesday. Damning report on his $10 billion agency's cult of narcissism was delivered to the House Judiciary Committee by an alliance of retired and active duty agents and analysts. Same group gave us the scathing DEI report last year about the FBI's degraded recruitment standards and the FBI's coddling of physically unfit, mentally ill, drug-taking, or generally useless agents to satisfy diversity requirements at the expense of merit and experience. This time, they assessed the entire bureau through several conclusions, including that local law enforcement partners have developed a disturbing loss of trust in the FBI, therefore reluctant to share information, with alarming consequences for national security and public safety. The whistleblower report draws on testimony from more than 30 independent, highly credible law enforcement sources. They're not only reluctant to work with the FBI, they have decided to no longer share actionable or substantive information on criminal, other intelligence activity with the FBI. They talk about a crisis of confidence in the FBI-led task force. Their relationships with local cops have deteriorated to the point of imploding in some cases because of poor management and ineffective leadership by the FBI. Much of this was precipitated by the loss of trust in the FBI triggered by its excessive response to the Capitol riot of January 6th, then followed by the FBI's raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida. One veteran says, I cannot understand why the FBI is not going after the far left militants and people Black Lives Matter Palestinian rioters with the same vigor that the FBI brought to bear against January 6th. Another 15-year veteran says many local law enforcement officers believe they could be targeted by the FBI and the Department of Justice because of their love for the United States, and they may be perceived as
to teach at the University of Sydney in Australia, and who I haven't spoken to for many years. But I said to Dr. Meron at the time, I said, what stops the Palestinians from launching an attack on Israeli targets, on Israeli forces? We've made a government. They've built an army of sorts. And they can concentrate force at a given point greater than Israel can concentrate. Greater than Israel can have at any possible point of attack. The attackers get to choose the time, they get to choose the place. It's simply not possible, regardless of intelligence warnings for Israel every time, to concentrate sufficient force at every possible location of attack. Eventually, the bad guys get lucky. Eventually, Israel's surprised, and that surprises happen should not itself be a surprise. And Dr. Meron said to me, yeah, of course they can do such a thing. Of course they can launch such an attack. But
okay, I understand I had some audio issues. Hope I'm back. But anyway, this is an important point. This is a video recorded the 12th of October, so 6 days after the October 7 attack by Michael Kochin, political science professor at the University of Tel Aviv. But he's making the point that what has deterred attacks on Israel is fear of reprisal. And this is a general philosophical point. You want to deter crime, right? You need to punish it severely.
But then the question is, what will happen to them after that? How will they be punished? In other words, what has prevented such attacks in the decades since 1970 has been Israel's ability to retaliate. That eventually stopped such attacks from Egypt, or from Egyptian-held territory in the Gaza Strip. It eventually stopped such attacks from Jordan. It stopped such attacks from Syria, and it stopped such attacks from Lebanon, even after the Lebanese government came to be dominated by Hezbollah. Hezbollah has launched indiscriminate attacks against it.
So part of the rational reason for Israel's furious attack on Gaza is to incentivize Gaza not to do this again. And the same philosophy holds true for libs of TikTok, right? When they go after people who want to say, oh man, publicly, they're going to state, oh, I wish the assassin had aimed better and killed Donald Trump. All right, you are creating an incentive for people to be more careful with their words. And so how strongly will you stand up for your side? Right. Will people fear to encourage the assassination of people like Donald Trump and people on your side because of the consequences? Let's get a little bit here from Fox.
Republicans are extremists. It's the same thing that her boss Joe Biden says. And sources inside of Kamala World say people expecting Harris to take different positions from Biden are going to end up being disappointed. Instead, expect some nibbling around the edges. Because the Biden record has always been the Biden-Harris record. They emphasized that from day one. Open borders, historic inflation, wars, American hostages, crime, and record low test scores. But the President-Harris record might be even more radical. Before she was vice president, Kamala was rated the most liberal senator in America, beating out Bernie Sanders. It's tough to do. She was for defund the police, wanted to start ICE from scratch, decriminalize illegal border crossings, ban fracking and offshore drilling. She supported the Green New Deal and Medicare for all, and she wanted to abolish private health insurance, just to name a few.
Okay, but wait a second. J.D. Vance made a joke about our country being run by childless cat ladies. I mean, surely that's a more serious offense than defunding the police.
Kamala was so far left that CBS actually called her a socialist.
Nonpartisan.
So Barack Obama was the third most liberal United States senator. Kamala Harris is the most liberal United States senator. America still elected Barack Obama, even though he had such a liberal voting record.
Of track has rated you as the most liberal senator. You supported the Green New Deal. You supported Medicare for all. You've supported legalizing marijuana. Joe Biden doesn't support those things. So are you going to bring the policies, those progressive policies that you supported as senator, into a Biden administration?
What I will do, and I promise you this, and this is what Joe wants me to do, this was part of our deal. I will always share with him my lived experience as it relates to any issue that we confront. And I promised Joe that I will give him that perspective and always be honest with him.
And is that a socialist or progressive perspective?
And I'm sure that that was absolutely essential for Joe Biden. He said, Kamala, I need to know your lived experience. I don't know about you, but in my work experience, every major employer, every major client that I have had said, Luke, here are the two things that are most important to me, that you are always willing to share with me your lived experience. And I need you to always tell me honestly what you feel and what you think. Because all my clients, all my employers, they've just been so passionately interested in my lived experience and in what I think. Yeah, right. Is that anyone's experience?
No. No, it is the perspective of a woman who grew up a black child in America, who was also a prosecutor, who also has a mother who arrived here at the age of 19 from India, who also, you know, likes hip hop. Like, what do you want to know?
Now, Kamala may not have had the answers then, but she's going to have to answer every one of those questions now. She's the top of the ticket, and she appears to have had some sort of media training. She's almost like a different person, but same radical policies. The kingmakers of the party, though, they'll be watching for two things. Number one, can she handle the attacks on her record? And number two, can she sufficiently distance herself from Joe Biden? Barack Obama is betting no. Even though NBC and CNN are reporting that Obama is about to give Kamala.
Okay, Michael Kochin here making a really good point about Israel surrounded by hundreds of millions of people who want it dead. How has Israel managed to discourage attacks such as what occurred on October 7, 2023? Because Israel simply does not have the numbers to have adequate forces in place to deter such attacks. Right? The only way to stop them is by heavy-handed reprisals.
So they haven't launched this kind of armed raid against civilian targets with the objective to shoot, behead, kidnap as many civilians as possible. So if you want to understand why these things don't happen anymore or hadn't happened until just now, right, you have to think about deterrence. The way that Israel deterred these attacks, built deterrence to these attacks, was by reprisals, reprisal raids. The reprisal raids were...
Right. The only way you honestly say how bad something is as a society is by how much you punish the infraction. Right. If you think it's bad for people to publicly state that they wish the assassin had killed Donald Trump, then you will support a campaign such as by Libs of TikTok, where you focus on those comments, retweet them, and note the employer.
Conducted against military targets, and they were conducted against civilian targets. Okay? And at the time, in the 50s and 60s, they were very controversial in international law. Israel did not deliberately kill civilians, but they did send troops in to destroy civilian targets, blow up houses, and so forth. Sometimes the civilians had that.
Right. That's the only way that Israel can effectively deter these kind of attacks, is you have to go in and you have to make such attacks very costly for the opposition. And this is what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's making the attack of October 7th very costly for the Palestinians.
They got time to evacuate, and sometimes they didn't. But these reprisal raids were effective at persuading the government.
Right, and Trump supporters will have to deter, right, the public cheering on of the assassination of Donald Trump and his supporters. Right, if you don't punish this kind of rhetoric, let alone the behavior, then you're going to be regarded as easy pickings.
It's the controlled territory to stop Palestinian fighters from launching raids into Israel. Okay, and thus they secured quiet on Israel's borders. Obviously, Hamas was not deterred from launching this attack or this series of attacks. Why were they not deterred? One explanation some people will give you is because they're fanatics. But
so one thing that distinguishes people on the right from people on the left is that people on the right are consistently more supportive of punishing norm violators or people who commit crime. Right? That is an outstanding characteristic of people on the right. So however flawed Republicans are with regard to law and order, I can't think of any prominent Democrat who's better than your average Republican with regard to law and order. Right? Republicans are far more likely than Democrats to support capital punishment for murder, for example. I can't think of any prominent Democrats now who support capital punishment for murder.
Even that we need to unpack and try to understand. I think also there's an international diplomatic picture that will make things a bit clearer. Now, if you look, if you compare the fanaticism thing, you compare the Palestinian and Israeli national movements, it's important to understand a very basic difference between them. Ever since Ben-Gurion took over the Zionist organization around 1930, the Zionist organization and then Ben-Gurion as leader of the state of Israel were focused on one matter above all, which is building the strength, the might, the power, the governing ability of the state of Israel. That's what Ben-Gurion called mamlachtiyut. That was his highest goal. It was more important than any Zionist goal, than any Jewish goal, than any socialist goal, even though Ben-Gurion was, of course, a Zionist, a Jew, and a socialist. Quite controversially, it was more important than rescuing Jews during the Holocaust.
So you don't have to care about Israel, care about Jews to understand the fundamental philosophy here, right? If you're on the right, you will usually be far more supportive of harsh punishment for criminals, particularly violent criminals, than people on the left. Right? This is an outstanding characteristic of what it means to be on the right.
Now, what Ben-Gurion wanted to build was an independent state of Israel, as powerful as he could manage, and therefore as free and independent as he could manage. Every choice Ben-Gurion made, whether in domestic politics, in foreign politics, in building the army, in what he wrote, and he wrote a great deal, in what he read, in what translations he encouraged and helped to sponsor, was intended to build the power of the state of Israel. Okay, to create a Jewish...
Yeah, if you want to survive and you want to thrive, you want to create an environment around you that is most conducive to your thriving. And you're going to be more effective doing that if you amass power.
State, and as powerful a Jewish state as he could attain. That attitude Ben-Gurion tried to convey that attitude to everybody else, including the public at large, and his success was real but limited. Okay, he had rivalry from ideological socialists, from territorial maximalists, both in socialist and non-socialist or anti-socialist or liberal parties. Give it to the state of Israel, and he was successful at building a state of the Jewish people.
Right. So Zionists are dedicated to building up a state of Israel. Palestinians seem to be dedicated at killing as many Jews as possible. They don't seem to build very much. But on the other hand, right, J.D. Vance made a joke about childless cat ladies running our country. Right? How big an obstacle is this for Donald Trump's campaign?
And this contrast of old versus young, new versus old is a real thing. It may not carry her to victory, but anybody who understands anything about not just America and not just about the view of Donald Trump, but about the mood of the world right now, he's the incumbent and she's the challenger. Now, he's going to say she's the incumbent because she's in the administration, but young versus old, as Rick Perry would say, the Biden campaign, or Harris campaign rather, showing a lot of chutzpah. A week ago, they said age equals wisdom. Now they say age equals dinosaur. I'll repeat what I've said for the last few nights. The disparity in the media's attitude towards the two campaigns continues to be massive. It's not just traditional liberal media bias and anti-Trump bias. There's a rapture over the vice president that is giving her campaign an enormous edge. And if you look at the pieces about her, they're not investigative pieces, right? They're glowing profiles. She likes restaurants. You know, she's rehabilitating her image with the California Democrats. I mean, she's getting billions of dollars in favorable coverage. And the first day that stops, I'll be curious, but it's not stopping. It doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon. Big advantage. Okay. She went to Teachers Union today, and as predicted, it was all pandering to the Teachers Union. There was no Glenn Youngkin moment. But I want you to see a statement she put out that some of you probably have seen, but probably most of you haven't. This statement she put out in response to the rioting that took place on Capitol Hill yesterday, pegged to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. Okay, this statement is, I may be wrong. I read pretty much every press release from her office. I don't remember her ever putting out a statement like this. Basically, she's denouncing the protesters in a way that is, you know, it's perfectly sensible. And it's the kind of thing, you know, maybe she should have been doing before, but she condemns flag burning. She condemns the graffiti and rhetoric. She says it's abhorrent. We must not tolerate it as a nation. Okay, the fact that she put this out, and they put it out relatively quickly. It took them a day. But if you look at the history of Kamala Harris, when she's faced a difficult tightrope walk, what's the base going to think? What's the center going to think? It usually causes the paralysis of analysis. So I'm super impressed that she and her office put this out, and I'm super impressed again.
Right. It's a sign that this is a more professional, more effective campaign than Kamala Harris has run before.
For those who believe, as many of my sources do, in both parties, that our only path to victory is to have more moderate, symbolically moderate positions break from the administration. I didn't see Joe Biden put a statement out like this. Maybe he did, and I missed it. But to me, this is a small example, but a significant one of what might be to come. Okay. Now, J.D. Vance, the campaign, the Trump campaign is not, as far as I know, despite what Sean Spicer said in the morning meeting, they've not put him out for an interview to try to explain, and I would say probably apologize. All the people who told Donald Trump not to pick him, to not listen to Don Jr. and Tucker and pick him, they're all feeling angry and annoyed and a little bit of I told you so, because none of this is a surprise. Not just what he said archivally, but the fact that he's not come out and addressed it. And I've heard from some people today, including some of you, who minimized what's going on in reaction to this. Who cares what Jennifer Aniston thinks? This is isolated. It's really not. I can tell you it's really not. Now, again, I don't know how big it is, but I can tell you it's big. And I can tell you that it's not Democrats or the media or a few Republicans. It's a lot of people. And it's a lot of people who are emotional about it. And I don't mean emotional in a negative way. I mean in a positive way. They're outraged. And I've had serious people say to me, Republicans say to me, they have to get Vance off the ticket. You know, if Biden can get off the ticket, even though Vance is already nominated, get him off the ticket. I watched Trump's rally last night. I may have said this yesterday. I thought his invocations of his running mate's name were pretty tepid. And I'll tell you something, as a student of Donald Trump, he hates bad press. He hates when a decision of his gets bad press. And he hates when it gets bad press because someone else is kicking up the problem. And if Kamala Harris picks a great running mate and people start to say, Trump blew his pick and Harris aced hers, I guarantee you, he will not be inclined to say, ooh, I made a mistake. He'll be inclined to blame his running mate. And he will say that to people on the patio at Mar-a-Lago. And he'll say it to donors. And it'll come out. And that'll be, you know, compound the problem they have. I still believe Vance has to give an interview to a female journalist and explain this and probably apologize, or it will not stop. And the ability that the Harris campaign has to link this to the 2025 project, the ability that they have to start doing targeted ads on social media about it, I don't want to overstate it, but I don't think I am when I say that there's a big problem for them to deal with it. And I can tell you about scores of communications I've had with people today, very similar to what we've heard here from folks about how seriously people are reacting to this. In terms of the Harris sweepstakes, I haven't spent a ton of time on it because I don't really care about breaking this when I have too much else going on. But it does appear, as I said yesterday, that the vetters are concerned about some of the so-called leading candidates. As those of you who've been here before know, I've been very bullish on should pick and will pick Kelly. I'd say now, if you were going to Ladbrokes with a fiver, put it on Governor Shapiro rather than Kelly for a variety of reasons. And Gabby Giffords was in Philadelphia today campaigning, and two-way colleague Lauren Leader, and Pete. And Pete, I brought in specifically because
top of the ticket. it's sort of axiomatic that the people vote for the top of the ticket. Everyone thinks Trump's already as evil as you could possibly get. Everybody thinks Trump's the worst misogynist in the entire world. So I don't know how anything his number two could say would turn someone away. My point is, how could someone who's lived through Access Hollywood, who's lived through all the other issues with Trump, get to this point in time and say, you know what, that's it, that's the final straw, I'm dumping Trump. I just don't see that people making that kind of connection.
All right, Lauren.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say hello to Eleanor Clift, because Eleanor's son, Robert.
Having read Hillbilly Elegy when it first came out, I think that Vance should use his wife to help him out here. She sounds brilliant. In his book, he makes her sound like an extremely supportive wife who's whip smart, and they are a team, and she needs to support him and show how pro-woman he is. And I think that would do a lot of, that would benefit him greatly if he comes out as a couple. And she's not the Tammy Wynette. Yeah. She's extremely accomplished on her own.
Right. And you're a communications professional, so that's your judgment about how to handle it. What's your sense from your community about how inflamed women are about this and men?
They are inflamed. I tend to not hang around other Republicans. Most of my friends are not Republicans. So they are annoyed with him, and they are a little concerned with him, and they tend to be pro-choice, as am I actually. So they don't understand why he is doing this. My feeling is, I know this type of person, and I'm not offended, and I assume it was a joke. And so personally, I don't care, but I'm not the one he has to worry about.
Okay. Molly, and then.
Yeah, women tend to take things very personally. All right, NS Lyons has one of the more interesting Substacks, and he talks about the parallel path to political power here at the National Conservatives Conference a couple of weeks ago. So you can win the election, but unless you start taking back the institutions, your ability to change things on the ground is going to be limited, all right? You have to be able to control the streets. You're going to have to be able to start wielding more and more influence over key institutions if you're going to turn society around.
With a thought exercise. So I want you to all imagine that you are a young conservative citizen of Hungary. The Cold War has just ended, communism has fallen, and you want to restore your nation. But there are quite a few challenges to this that you face. Your country is allegedly post-communist, but the very same old communist officials and apparatchiks are still infesting all the positions of power, only now they call themselves liberals. Every institution, including the administrative bureaucracy, the legal system, the media, the cultural centers, and the universities are still controlled by the post-communist left. Even the private corporations are owned by the left, since all the former state companies were sold off on the cheap to corrupt ex-communist officials. Meanwhile, the common people are atomized, distrustful, dispirited. For decades, the communist regime deliberately crushed all associations and organizing by non-communists. Now the only ones with any real organizational capacity are the former communists, who maintain an immense network. Under communism, there was a party organizer, an informant, stationed in every single apartment building across the country. And they're still there. They're all still there, ready to mobilize politically for the left, except now under democracy. In other words, I want you to imagine, and I know this will be very difficult, that your country is controlled by a vast, entrenched, and unaccountable leftist deep state. So how can you possibly take on this Leviathan and prevail against it in a democratic system? Well, the young right-wing Fidesz party of now Prime Minister Viktor Orban managed to do it. And they did it by completely changing the rules of the game through a strategy of parallel organizing. Rather than work within a rigged system, they maneuvered outside the former political structures and pivoted directly to the grassroots level. They deliberately turned away from high politics and founded what was called the civic circles movement. The civic circles were not even a political movement. They focused on establishing community organizations across the nation to bring people together in grassroots civic action, volunteer work, and practical education in local self-governance. So chapters of local volunteers planted gardens, collected trash, helped with childcare. That one was especially popular. They helped local people in need and helped solve local problems. They founded new parallel education and media systems and institutions. They provided forums for free intellectual discussion and debate. They promoted art and culture that happened to celebrate national history and conservative values. They formed chapters in the universities and provided a patronage network to help identify and launch promising young talent throughout society. In short, the Hungarian left deliberately copied the left's boundless energy for community organizing, and it worked brilliantly. When the moment came to challenge the left in the political sphere, the Hungarian right, formerly limited to a party of conservative intellectuals who sat around at conferences, was able to mobilize a robust, entirely new grassroots power base made up of the country's working and middle class, which it had built from the ground up. Suddenly, they had extensive grassroots organizational capacity. They had their own information networks. They had a nationwide network of young, energetic
Right. So conservatives are starting to build their own information networks. They've got talk radio. They've got websites like Rumble. And one of the leaders in this area is Mike Benz.
I was going to be
formerly
talking to you
Frame
guys
Game
about
Radio.
the whole of society censorship framework and going through the internal guts of how our censorship ecosystem works. But then I had a 5 a.m. flight here this morning, and I got in about 9 a.m., and there was an absurd amount of DC traffic. And I asked the cab driver, hey, is there something big going on in the city today? And he goes, it's NATO. He goes, it's NATO, man. It's foreign dignitaries and stuff. And I thought, oh, that's right. Today is the first day of the NATO summit. And so I thought I would actually take this sort of moment in time where we're potentially on the precipice of World War III, and we may have a zombie donut running for president, and we don't know what's going to happen in all this turbulence, because it really relates to my field of specialty on the censorship industry and the nature of the social media freedoms that were just discussed, which is that upstream of it all is NATO. This is sort of a story that very few people really understand. A lot of people think Mark Zuckerberg is in charge, or ambigendered, pink-haired, feminists or something. Everyone's got their own sort of bugaboo. But the story really begins with NATO. And let me just, to back that up, it's useful to sort of understand a little bit of how the military sees the world and how it sees the field of battle. Our U.S. military doctrine has a concept of four theaters of war, 4 quadrants. We have the strategic, the tactical, the logistical, and the political. And those are the 4 ways you can win or lose a war. So the first way is strategic, what's our grand strategy, or the grand chessboard of it all. The tactics are, where are we going to strike? How are we going to do it? How are we going to time it? How are we going to cloak it? The logistics are, how are we going to get the money for it? How are we going to get the tanks in position? How are we going to run the small arms munitions to our paramilitary groups? But the fourth one, which is very interesting, and it's really where NATO comes into the picture, is the political quadrant of war, which is that you can win or lose a war depending on whether or not you have political support or not at home. Vice versa with your adversary, if they have support or no support for the war at home. Because to fund a military, you need money. Mercenaries don't.
So one major problem with Bibi Netanyahu is that he has not created a unified country, right? Israel's incredibly divided, and Israel's fighting for its life, surrounded by all sorts of enemies, fighting on the verge of fighting 7 different wars, and you've got a fractured nation. So a fractured nation is not nearly as effective. So contrary to contemporary rhetoric, diversity is not our strength, right? The diversity means that we should celebrate the less we have in common with each other. A more cohesive, united country is going to be far stronger, not just at fighting war, but creating a higher quality of life for its citizens.
Don't work as charities. They work. You need money, and you need a mandate. You need jurisdiction to enter the field. And this is one of the ways that the U.S. lost Vietnam, was through the political. It was not so much the strategic, the tactical, or the logistical. It was the fact that the politicians who had to answer to their domestic base cut the plug. And so therefore, no more tanks, no more bullets. You lose the war that way. So fast forward now to 1991, the internet comes online, and free speech was an instrument of statecraft for the first 13 years of the internet in a totally unalloyed way. DARPA, the US military, funded all of the initial free speech architecture we now have, from VPNs to end-to-end encrypted chats to the Tor sort of onion network to be able to buy and sell goods in an anonymous way. Why? Because it was very useful to be able to build up dissident groups, their communications structure. NATO provided funding to the groups in Yugoslavia before NATO's bombings in 1995 and 1999 to set up their own web pages in order to evade Yugoslav state control over media. So free speech was beloved by NATO and the US military. But then a funny thing happened in 2014, which was Ukraine. Ukraine was this moment where we had, reasonable minds can perhaps disagree about what the ultimate source of that conflict was. But the fact is the US government provided $5 billion in aid to ultimately to the coup faction that ended up toppling the democratically elected government of Ukraine under Viktor Yanukovych. And they activated this rent-a-riot mob just weeks after Yanukovych rejected an IMF trade deal and sided with Russia.
Okay, so you can find more of Mike Benz's speech on the National Conservatism YouTube channel. Here are some interesting points from today's Goodfellows program from the Hoover Institute at Stanford University.
I'm sorry, Bridger. It's really hard to be sure that he has the physical and mental stamina to continue in this role. And I think there's a legitimate argument that if he can't run for re-election, then why is he...
So this was recorded before Joe Biden dropped out.
President of the United States, the most onerous job in the world, apart from being the moderator.
So in the last few hours, we've had a joint Chinese-Russian air flight exercise near the coast of Alaska, and we had to scramble fighter jets to deter this exercise. So the United States may look pretty weak right now.
Of Goodfellows. So I think even short-run predictions are extremely difficult this year. As they say in economics, the tails of the distribution have gotten a whole lot fatter. We don't know how Harris is going to poll after the initial bump that inevitably has happened.
Forgive me. So this was recorded, I think, today.
We got to ask ourselves, how's she going to look in 4 weeks' time after all the excitement has died down? Will it?
Right. This is historian Neil Ferguson.
Turn out that Vance was a mistake. That's certainly the chatter that one hears in some Republican circles. So I'm not even sure the next 7 days are predictable, much less the next 7 months.
Let me go with what you were saying, and HR will have something to say. Between now and November, there's likely.
Right. And this is economist John Cochran, and HR is HR McMaster, former Trump National Security Advisor.
Some major event that the Biden-Harris administration has to react to.
I would say the chances of that are close to 100%. And I think that, you know, what we've all been talking about, and I think Neil mentioned, is what is provocative is the perception of weakness. And I do think this axis of aggressors, which we've been talking about, is getting more bold right now. I mean, I don't think we have to wait. I think it's very likely that there's going to be a major escalation of the conflict in Israel, especially involving southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
Already what you've seen are rumors, and I think they're more than rumors, that the Russians are going to provide more advanced shore-to-ship capabilities to the Houthis. I think Iran I think I could envision Iran shutting down the Strait of Hormuz as part of a much larger aggressive act against, you know, its Arab neighbors, maybe direct attacks on oil facilities in eastern Saudi Arabia. And you know, I think what you were seeing already happen in Iraq is Iranian proxy forces have resumed attacks on American forces. People aren't paying attention to that. I think it's quite significant.
The Houthis landed a drone in Israel, and Fatah and Hamas got together and brokered a deal brokered by China, and now they have a power sharing arrangement. Nobody is sitting around waiting to see what happens.
Absolutely. I think it's already happening, and I think there's likely, you know,
Neil has a couple more too.
Don't forget, all of this is playing out while the AI hype bubble is bursting, or at least deflating, and the economy, just look at the labor market, is slowing. And so things are going to look very different in just a few weeks' time, both geopolitically and economically, and I think also politically. Can you believe it? They decided to have their convention in Chicago. You'd have thought that after 1968, they'd never have another convention there again. But another thing that I think is quite easy to predict is that the same protesters who were disgracefully burning the Stars and Stripes in Washington today and vandalizing national monuments will show up in Chicago to apply pressure to the Democrats to ensure that Kamala Harris's foreign policy, if she's elected president, is to the left of Joe Biden's. And I think that's a very high probability scenario.
And I want to go on to, you know, if it's a wipeout election one way or the other, okay, now we can go on to thinking about our President X's policy plans. But I foresee a very close election. And if Trump wins a very close election, and if he doesn't get the House and the Senate as well, the lawfare is going to escalate to civil war levels. And I just want to put in one plug for the Supreme Court. We don't talk about way near enough because this has been incredibly consequential. But the Supreme Court just saved Joe Biden. They're all in how they made Trump a dictator. But no, the Supreme Court just saved Joe Biden because what Trump's going to play back, you can be sure the first thing he's going to do is try to indict Biden for, I don't know, spending $400 billion on student loans, even without congressional authorization. And the Supreme Court just stopped him from doing that. So 3 cheers for the Supreme Court for putting a little bit of this in the bottle. But if it's a narrow election, it's going to be really chaos.
So yesterday I played some excerpts from a discussion with Tanya Reynolds, a professor of evolutionary psychology, and here she's talking about attitudes towards hierarchy. So people on the right, people who are traditional, people who are conservative, much more at ease with a hierarchical society and hierarchical decision-making, while people on the left tend to prefer more egalitarian means.
Cheeseburger you came across, but now that there are ample cheeseburgers, you shouldn't eat every cheeseburger that you come across. It seems like a similar kind of a problem.
Yeah, and so some of these, like, I'm also not sure. So anyways, what we found is that indeed conservatives and Republicans, they were more likely to detect this connection between something in the past that was negative and predicting negative outcomes in the future. So
right. So people on the right, another thing they do is they notice bad behavior that you may have engaged in the past. And people on the right are more likely to think that that is predictive of how you will behave in the future.
like we gave them scenarios like, imagine 100 people were raised in single parent homes. If you had to guess how many of those 100 people went on to later be divorced. So that's making a prediction about the future. And we also had a retrospective condition where it was like, imagine 100 people are divorced. If you had to guess how many of those 100 people grew up in single parent homes. And so this allowed us to see, is it about making a prediction, or can people also access the information retrospectively as well? And so what we found is that the biggest differences ideologically were when it was a prediction about the future, but not retrospectively. You didn't see as much of a difference. And so this kind of makes me wonder, are people truly not recognizing this predictive information, or do they not want to?
Right. So from my right-wing conservative perspective, it's just common sense that the past is highly likely to be predictive of the future. That if you're a convicted felon or you've engaged in awful behavior in the past, right? I would be silly to just completely deny that may well have some powerful predictive ability for the future. To me, that's just common sense, but it's much more of a right-wing tendency than a left-wing tendency. All right, left-wing tendencies are much more likely to offer people, from my perspective, cheap grace, a clean slate.
Peace. You know the old story about, I guess, sort of how his life ended. I won't repeat it, but Adorno would have called the police is apparently a sentiment that's been circulating either jokingly or perhaps approvingly. I'm not sure.
So this is a reference to Theodor Adorno, part of the Frankfurt School, a left-wing theorist, but someone who is not thrilled with 1960s student radicals taking over American college campuses, and he was quite willing to call the police on them.
Julius mentions it for your comment as we finally conclude with the thing I thought I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because I have some friends interested in these issues who are not critical theorists, but who wonder what does this debate about free speech and so on and activism have to teach us about how we're going to address the concerns of our Jewish students and their families?
I wouldn't send
Michael. Jacob.
All right, this is Jacob Siegel of Tablet Magazine.
Yes.
You wouldn't send them?
No, absolutely not. I wouldn't send them, and if they were, I certainly wouldn't send, look, I wouldn't send them where? I wouldn't send them to universities that have been inculcating ideologies that were perfectly consistent with the eruptions of pro-Hamas sentiment on October 8th. And
yeah, that's a key point. All right, it's not like the pro-Hamas sentiments that erupted on October 8th at Harvard University and other college campuses was out of touch with the underlying ethic that's taught at American university campuses, right? A dominant moral ethic among Western intellectuals, whether on campus or off campus, is essentially the Leninist notion of imperialism, that the late stage of capitalism is imperialism, that capitalist nations, free market nations are always driven to take over other nations, when in reality, every single nation state is a settler colonial state, because no nation is formed by people coming up out of the ground. All right, all nation states are formed by people moving into an area and expelling some people, killing some people, and protecting a particular area for a particular people.
Then act shocked and scandalized that these places that had been openly discriminating against Asian applicants had been openly inculcating ferocious sociopathic kind of anti-white ideologies had extended that.
Right, so there is a knee-jerk tendency among our elite intellectuals to instinctively side with non-white people against white people. And this is an ideology that has been dominant on Western university campuses for decades.
Same ideology to Jews, which it had implicitly encompassed all along anyway. I wouldn't be shocked that institutions that had been promoting a kind of revolutionary bloodlust as a student curriculum item, that these kids acted this stuff out on October 8th. And in addition to not being shocked that that happened at these places where you could see it predictably developing in slow motion for 2 decades, what I absolutely would not have done if I did find my children there was to have them plead for the protection of the same administrators whose whole job is to enforce a kind of racial caste system at these universities. I think that, to put it sharply, as you asked for, I think that the response by many Jewish students in America and their parents has been self-defeating, weak, confused, lacking any strategic.
Right. The more diverse America gets, the less pro-Israel it gets. Right. Jews don't realize how good they've had it in the United States. Jewish organizations, right, have consistently agitated for more immigration, more Muslim immigration, more non-white immigration. And this has now bit Jews in the butt because white Americans are far more supportive of Jews and the Jewish state than non-white Americans. And so when you hear about young Americans are not nearly as supportive of Israel as older Americans, that's because young Americans are much less likely to be white, right? This primarily breaks down along a racial grounds.
Forethought, lacking any genuine understanding of the relationship of Jews to Israel. And I don't just mean the current Israeli government. I mean the nation of Israel that has existed for thousands of years. And so, unfortunately.
So this is huge. You've got a prominent Jewish intellectual here calling out the knee-jerk anti-white bias on American university campuses. Jews in America tend to have average IQs around the 110 level, right? The average European American has an IQ around 100. So a majority of Americans who have IQs above 145 at genius level are Ashkenazi Jews. So Jews are disproportionately influential. And if Jews start turning against woke culture, or even a tiny proportion of them, all right, that will have a disproportionate effect on American intellectual and institutional and political and cultural life.
There is no quick fix at these places, which, as we've been saying all along, are kind of servants of the state. Well, if this in some sense is the ideology of the ruling.
Yeah, so many Jews, particularly older Jews, have this knee-jerk instinctive fear of a white Christian America. And they thought that a more diverse America would be better for Jews. And it certainly hasn't turned out that way.
Ruling party, then it expresses itself in the credentialing institutions of that ruling party. And you have to make a decision ultimately. This is the decision that Jews and other people have to make. Do you want to burnish your credentials within that ruling party? Or are you willing to actually be an outsider? Are you willing to sacrifice the status, and to put it in Jew?
And this is what N.S. Lyons was talking about 15 minutes ago, setting up alternate institutions, taking over existing institutions, all right, creating dominance on the streets, right? If you don't control the streets, all right, you don't really exercise much power.
Jewish historical terms, are you willing to sacrifice the Hellenistic status to look out for your own interests? And if you're not willing to do that, and if all you really want to do is carve out an exception for yourself so that you have some bubble of, sort of DEI protections within institutions that are committed to racialist ideologies, don't be surprised when that bubble collapses on your head, as it certainly will.
I know Jacob's a veteran. I can't help thinking that if I were a parent in America of Jewish kids, that I would have a serious.
And Jacob Siegel's a veteran of the American Armed Forces. It's not that he's an IDF veteran, right? He's a former Marine, I believe.
Talk about sending them to Israel to join the IDF before I would send them to Harvard or Yale.
Yeah, so that would be one practical answer, and then they'll probably age out of wanting to go to an elite American university, which is what happened to all my kids, somewhat against my will. But there's at a very practical level, pretty much every American elite universities, a lot of non-elite ones, now have a Chabad rabbi who works with students, who monitors the situation. Chabad have been experts for more than 200 years at the dialectic of collaboration and resistance, right? They were the ones who took the side of the Tsar against all the other rabbis who took the side of Napoleon. So they have a very sophisticated institutional knowledge about collaboration and resistance. And so I would simply, if when you're visiting on campus or after the visit, just talk to the Chabad rabbi, see what he thinks the situation is, okay? And see what he thinks about the situation on his campus and whether, because he talks all the time to his colleagues, whether other schools that you're considering might be better or worse.
I think there's been a lot of conflation. I mean, and this relates to the free speech topic of sort of free speech with other things and this whole, in the past several months around these.
Right. When you take over a building or you deny entrance to Zionists to normal campus functions, that's not free speech, right? The reason that people objected to the Palestinian pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests is not the protests, it's because they were essentially creating embargoes, not allowing people to go to the buildings or to the proceedings or to the synagogue that they wanted, right? They limited the movement of Jews, right? And when you stop people, all right, when you put on an embargo of free movement, that's essentially an act of war. In international law, you embargo a country, you have gone to war with that country. And when these pro-Palestine protesters were putting embargoes on Jews, all right, they were going to war with Jews, right? You would not put up with someone preventing you from leaving your house, going grocery shopping, going to your work, all right? You would react at some point very strongly to anyone trying to do that, right? Let's get the latest on the Trump assassination attempt.
Closer to understanding why he pulled the trigger. Fox News national correspondent Jeff Paul is in Butler, Pennsylvania with the latest. Jeff.
Well, yeah, Kaylee, it's been nearly 2 weeks since the former president was shot, and as you mentioned, we are no closer, seemingly, to getting answers to the biggest remaining question, which is why this all happened in the first place. But we are starting to get some more info and some more videos that sort of helping fill some of those gaps as this investigation continues. And one of them being this new video that was shot by our Fox drone team. It offers a new view of what would have likely have been the line of sight of both the shooter and the counter snipers. Now, the first gives you a glimpse into the view of the person firing the shots. That's the roof there on the bottom of the screen, and to the right, the area of the stage where Trump was speaking from. Now, you notice some trees covering one of the counter snipers' positions. Now, the other angle is from the likely viewpoint of one of the counter snipers, the shooter's position off into the distance next to that tree. Now, Trump sounding off over the phone today here on Fox News, saying the biggest misstep, in his opinion, is on the Secret Service.
The Secret Service, they're such great people.
Yes.
It's a blight on their reputation. There should have been somebody on the roof. When you look at it now, it's a clear shot.
Pennsylvania State Police recently telling Congress that they thought they saw 2 local police officers leaving their post just prior to the shooting. And the Butler County DA calls that misinformation, and that the 2 police officers did exactly what they were told, with only one of the police officers moving a bit to keep eyes on what they described was a suspicious person, which turned out to be the shooter. Well, tonight, Kaylee, the state police says they stand by their testimony. Back to you.
Jeff, thank you.
Okay, I want to go back more to the importance of deterrence. This is political science professor Michael Kochin.
In the land of Israel, in Palestine. The Palestinian national movement is a very different story. While one of the goals of the Palestinian national movement has been to build up an independent state of the Palestinian people in Palestine, that has never been their overriding, most important goal to which everything else ought to be sacrificed. The Palestinian parties have generally been revolutionary. Some of them have been Islamic revolutionaries. Some of them have been socialist revolutionaries. And they've always put revolutionary goals ahead of national goals.
Right. The Palestinians don't seem to build anything. All they do is destroy.
Palestinian national goals. Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And like the Muslim Brotherhood as a whole, it has as its goal a worldwide Islamic caliphate. Okay? So
during the 1950s, there were all these raids into Israel, just killing Israeli civilians, and Israel developed a deterrence. They would then mount an aggressive attack on the state that facilitated the raids into Israel?
Both.
It's called escalation dominance. That's been Israel's military strategy because they are such a tiny country that they cannot have a large standing army. Now, in this current conflict, Israel has not been operating with escalation dominance, and Hezbollah has been repeatedly shelling northern Israel, and 100,000 Israelis have had to move out of their homes. So the state of Israel has effectively been made much smaller since October 7th, particularly with regard to the north.
Hamas and Fatah, right, run governmental entities. Hamas runs Gaza, the Gaza Strip. The Fatah party runs the Palestinian Authority. They've never run them with a view toward building them as independent states or as parts of an independent Palestinian state as a goal overall. Okay? The Palestinians, for example, in the West Bank have not erected a meaningful tax structure. Okay? They rely on foreign aid to pay the salaries of their workers and pay for the weapons that their police are allowed to have. They haven't succeeded in collecting substantial revenues that are substantial compared to their expenditures. Hamas also heavily relies on foreign aid from Iran, from Qatar. It does tax.
And now we know that Iran has been funding these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests on American college campuses.
Trade, but mostly it relies on foreign aid. Hamas spokesman was just on Russian television saying that the Israelis thought that they would be burdened with the government of Gaza, and we chose instead to emphasize war against Israel, and that's why we were able to do this operation, because the Israelis had no idea that we would make this kind of thing a priority over governing Gaza. So the Palestinian national movement, right, has other goals than an independent state of Palestine. Okay? The goals: killing Jews, taking land back before, about the Fedayeen raids. What stopped the Fedayeen raids? Israeli retaliation convinced the governments of the territories from which the raids were launched that the raids did not accomplish goals that were worth the cost that Israel imposed on them. Okay? Israeli retaliation punished the states for hosting these Palestinian forces, allowing these raids, and convinced these governments that their goals as states, their most important goals, to defend their people, to rule their own country, to participate as respectable states in the world community of states. Right? All these goals could not be accomplished if they allowed the Palestinians to wage their peculiar kind of war against the Jews. The idea of the Oslo process was to create a Palestinian state. Right? Some people will point to the 2006 Lebanon war when Hezbollah attacked Israel. Israel responded. To some people's minds, that war ended inconclusively. But there are two lessons of that war that are not widely understood, and I don't think were understood by Hamas. The first lesson, if you look very carefully through, for example, the testimonies given to the Winograd Commission that investigated the war, there was no substantial international pressure on Israel not to do any of the things that the Israelis really wanted to do. This was a surprise to Israel. The Israelis did not expect this. Their planning before the war and their choices during the war, for almost all of the war, reflected the notion that just now, the international community, the Security Council, the United States, France will intervene to keep us from continuing operations against Hezbollah. In fact, in 2006, both the presidents of the United States and the presidents of France were perfectly willing to see Israel make as much war against Hezbollah as it wanted. Whatever Israel was willing to do to Hezbollah, they were in Lebanon. They were perfectly happy to see happen, and there was no red light until late in the war. In order to end the war, Israel asked for a kind of fake diplomatic pressure to be introduced. This is all in the testimonies to the Winograd Commission. So, in fact, there was no pressure to stop operations against Hezbollah, and Israel stopped operations against Hezbollah based on its own notion of its goals being met. Okay, what were those goals? Those goals were to degrade Hezbollah military capacity and to deter Hezbollah from operating in the future. Now, one reason why people don't really understand those goals is that the prime minister at the time, Ehud Olmert, did not understand that those were the goals of the war. He did not understand that the plans that he was proposed by the chief of staff, approved in the cabinet, had those as the goals. The defense minister understood, the foreign minister understood, the chief of the general staff understood, but the prime minister did not understand, did not adequately explain the war, did not give the kind of rhetorical...
Okay, so we're going to have some kind of war in southern Lebanon very shortly, and it's expected to be absolutely brutal. So Hamas has such a large number of rockets that they're going to be able to devastate much of Tel Aviv. All right. I've been revolted by the quality of the Trump conspiracy theories. So here's Robert Barnes. I just don't find his analysis.
I think they had got word that Trump was not going to pick the vice president that they wanted him to pick. That the sort of deep state crowd wanted Trump to pick someone that would provide insurance for the deep state, that they could take Trump out at any time and know that the vice president was their ally. And that's who Tim Scott is. That's who Marco Rubio is. That's who Doug Burgum is. And Trump let them think that he might pick them, but it had been clear for about 3 weeks that J.D. Vance was in the lead. J.D. Vance is much more populist. He was anti the Ukraine war. He fought with the Marines in Iraq and felt he got lied to. I remember talking to him for about an hour and a half before he made the decision to come out against the Ukraine war back in March of 2022. And so I saw Karl Rove, whose hands were shaking with rage when he got the news that J.D. Vance was going to be the pick. So I think the goal on both sides of the deep state, the Republican and Democratic side, was to take Trump out before he could be officially the nominee, before J.D. Vance could be his official successor and vice presidential pick. And there's plenty of evidence that we have that either you have, one of the key things I always talk about in looking at whether something is a false flag. So like sometimes people misunderstand false flag to mean an event did not occur. A false flag is literally the old pirates would, post a false flag to be able to get real close to the ship they were going to raid, wait till they get right next to the ship, and then they bring up the old Jolly Roger. And it's surprise, surprise, we're not the British or the French or the Spanish or whoever you thought we were. So the culprit is not always correctly identified. And that doesn't always require that the culprit they blame not also be a culprit. It just means the narrative of the lone assassin, because America's unique in this respect. We're the only country that always seems to only have a lone assassin. Look at all the other people that get shot around the world, or as some attempted assassination. More often than not, there's some sort of conspiracy afoot, according to the official narrative. But in the United States, it's always just some lone nut job that try to do something, so that they don't have to have meaningful complicity and culpability. But the way in which it happened, the evidence that's already developing, Chris Martinson's doing some great audio analysis work on this as we speak, strongly suggests that there were multiple shooters.
Yeah, just absurd. So Robert Barnes is like Alex Jones level analysis. I don't think he holds up very well.
And it was somewhat refreshing to hear actual answers come out. Let's see. Should we start with 32? South 32, where it took place. There were no comms between them. They weren't on the same comms line. That was another thing we learned. So like when the locals, presumably heard word, we're going to get to all that from the rally goers. There's a guy on the roof. The guy on the roof. It wasn't as easy as pressing down your comms button on your walkie-talkie and saying, "Hey, Secret Service, take out this guy." You're communicating only to other locals. And then on top of all that, Mike, we began the show with Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri saying he's had whistleblowers come forward to him to say that there was a guy who was dedicated to the roof. He got down from the roof because it was too hot. We went back and looked up the high in Butler, Pennsylvania that day, 76 degrees. Oof. All of which leaves us where?
Yeah, first of all, full marks to Kimberly Cheadle for being the first person to ever get Democrat Jamie Raskin and James Comer on the Republican side to agree on anything. Methodology to the security planning for an event, whether it's a rally or a sporting event or whatever it may be. And there's a difference between a national security event, which is something like the RNC or the DNC or the Super Bowl, where you have a year at least out to plan, right? And to dedicate resources. And obviously you're going to massive resources. And then there's the events like took place in Pennsylvania, campaign rallies, for instance. You have less notice, but you still have notice. Right? You still have time to plan, and you still have resources. So from the very beginning, the planning of this by the Secret Service, which has primacy, right? They can task and they can request and allocate resources from local and state police, but they're still in charge. They're still the ones who have to make that final call and say, yes, this.
Right. That's why it's so frustrating, so ridiculous when the head of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, said, "Oh, that wasn't our responsibility on top of the building." They're still in charge, even if they're using local law enforcement.
Plan looks good. So you go out and you do your advance. You put together the site survey, which includes everything: deployment of resources, responsibilities, communications plan, time.
Yeah, that's all U.S. Secret Service. All right, this is Abigail Shrier. She wrote a book about the trans revolution. She's written a book about bad therapy. She's an op-ed columnist for the Wall Street Journal. she is not a big fan of America first. Why does she want such an interventionist American foreign policy? Because she believes that's best for Israel, right? The current alignment of the United States so close with Israel is not in America's best interests, probably not in Israel's best interests either. This is Abigail Shrier talking to the Free Press that was started by Barry Weiss.
I think it was a very good speech.
Yeah.
I think that it tried to, but it did sort of, I think, indicate the two people that go by the term America first. There are essentially two camps, right? You have the Trump first term, which went by America first. It was about putting America's interests first, but it was not isolationist. It was about getting.
Well, sometimes being isolationist is to your national advantage. All right. Overall, Trump backing away from America's many international obligations and treaties, right, is focused on putting American interests first. And I agree with Trump's general direction.
You know, European countries to pay more for NATO, but it was not. But it was the party of the Abraham Accords too. Right. Then you have the other group that goes by America first, which is a far darker messaging. It is.
Isolationism isn't a darker messaging. It's a different hero system. It's probably a more pragmatic approach, and there are a lot of good arguments for it.
Exactly what Tucker said, and I think he represents it. Stepping over the dead bodies of Americans who've been killed by fentanyl to give money to Ukraine. He called it a middle finger in the face of every American. I think Trump has generally, at least the vibe, has been to turn away from that anger, resentment of one camp of this America First group.
Well, sometimes anger and resentment is rightly placed. I mean, why on earth is the United States spending hundreds of billions of dollars to fund Ukraine? Has absolutely nothing to do with American interests. Whatever happens in Ukraine, whatever happens between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, has absolutely nothing to do with the lives of 99% of Americans. Right? American national interests are not at risk here.
And honestly, I think that version of America First, the angry $1 to Ukraine is a middle finger in the face of Americans, I think that's a really bad path. And
well, why is it so bad? She doesn't want to say the truth. She thinks it's so bad because it will reduce American commitment to Israel, right? What she's primarily about is Israel first. And she wants America to compromise its own national security interests in support of the Jewish state of Israel.
It's about his thoughts on this body camera footage. So, Jimmy, we see this man who is in a suit, and he appears to be a Secret Service agent, and he is asking a lot of questions up on that roof. It seems like there's a lot of confusion, and this body camera footage is actually from about an hour after the actual shots were fired.
Yeah, so my takeaway from that body camera footage was the first thing that I, as a sniper, take away from it is I hear that the snipers that were in the window took a picture of the guy and knew something was up with him. First of all, my question is why are those guys in that second windows building? Why are they in there? Why were they not on the roof like the other guys were? Mm-hmm. Coming from a sniper's standpoint, if you're inside of a building looking through a window, you narrow down your field of vision tremendously. Two, the window that they're looking out of is looking towards Trump. You're narrowing down your window of what you can see, the field of vision, and you are tremendously limiting yourself in your visibility. Number two, putting yourself in that room, you're going to make yourself non-visible. And that's the goal. If you are putting yourself in some situation like that, is you don't want to be seen. You don't want people to see you. And we can see that in this case, right? Nobody's seen these guys. We didn't even know they were there until this body camera footage is saying that they were there, right? Mm-hmm. And number three would be in that body camera footage, he literally goes, the window's right over there, just go over there and talk to him. So these guys could have seen. Now, again, I wasn't there. I don't know the perspective of what that window could see and what they could not see. However, based on him saying the window's right over there, just go over there and talk to him, why did they not see this guy climbing the roof with a rifle and go ahead and eliminate that threat? That's the questions that I have.
The thing I found interesting about it, Jimmy, was that they knew the guy was there. I mean, this is an acknowledgement that we had kind of heard before that they saw him. He was suspicious. He was identified as suspicious before the shots were fired, before President Trump took the stage. He was still allowed to take the stage. So they knew this guy was weird. There was something hinky going on. They still let President Trump take the stage. Snipers, apparently, Beaver Creek snipers, they said, took pictures of him and sent it out and circulated it. So they knew something was not right, but they still let the former president go out and be basically a sitting duck up there on that stage. What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like it's a lack of communication. They take these pictures, they put the pictures out there. Clearly, they know this guy's a threat. The fact that they allowed the president to go up there knowing that there's a threat there and they did not detain this guy.
Yeah, something weird.
Line. All the information that really anybody who has common sense would think, yeah, you ought to put that into the plan. And then you go from there. This breakdown was a series of failures, which is typical for a security process. It's usually not just one thing. So if we break it down and we say, look, what was the planning like? Well, now we know that Butler County, Washington County, and Beaver County, they all allocated some of their local resources to this event. Butler County was essentially command and control for the local resources, the emergency service unit that was discussed just during that side. But they had a meeting the morning of the rally, the 13th of July, in the morning, about 9 a.m. or so. They had a meeting of local officials, the sniper teams, the SWAT teams, patrol, all those local elements gathered together to discuss what was going to happen later that day. And guess who didn't attend? The Secret Service.
Yeah, that's why I just have a sense that if there was something malicious going on, it'd be someone with a connection to the Secret Service that sabotaged the protection of Donald Trump.
Having done that in the past, is not surprising to me that it comes out at this point about this young man, because it's indicative of a desire to do a grand, sweeping, almost romantic in their mind gesture to get
this rings true to me.
attention and to fight back against, rail against a system that they feel has aggrieved them in some way.
In terms of the political system, were other figureheads also at risk? We know that the motive is what's on everyone's mind. Why did this happen? But people are also wondering, is it possible that President Biden was at risk too and he was planning something there? What's your take on that?
I think anything's possible. I wouldn't rule out anything. For him specifically to go after President Trump, it could be that he has no specific issue with President Trump himself. It could be that he is the higher profile of the two at the moment, seemingly ahead in the polls, and he wanted to influence history. He maybe wanted to derail a potential re-election of President Trump. There may have been plans for him to go after President Biden. I think, however, it's pretty much understood by people who do this that this one act that they're doing like this is going to be their last act. So if you're going to do
let's
it, this is the one you're going to do. It's the most
Kip
important one to you.
Onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, buddy, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good. I get to see your pretty face.
I figured it was only fair. You had some sound snafus earlier. Were you able to rectify that? I think it was just for a short period, maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
I sure hope so. I haven't had any complaints the last hour or so.
No. I think whatever you did worked. I was gonna say, as it stands now, all you got's a couple of cult members like me and Elliot. What are you gonna do to next level this thing out and compete with Fox News and all the rest of the gang?
I don't have any grand strategy. I'll have to talk to smart people at Shaw.
Well, you've got a lot of life experiences. I think for some constructive criticism, I think you should maybe do a little bit more reminiscing. You got 58 years worth of experiences, and people could probably learn a little bit from that. I know you do that somewhat, but to me, a lot of times when I'm listening to you, it seems more like kind of a political junkie / life coach, but I don't get to hear a lot of the things you've learned from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's more likely to tap into often things that are emotional, and the more passionate you are about something, the more compelling it is to listen to or to watch.
Right. Personally, if I had it to all do over again, I'm sure you do that every once in a while. I wish I could have done without the 100 pounds or so of weed that I've smoked over the years. And that's shitty to have to admit, that I've given Cheech and Chong a run for their money over the years. But that's one thing that I wish that I could have done without with me personally, the natural thing in our culture is to go right to drinking because it is the social lubricant, I noticed that after I was keeping score with I don't know, the first couple of dozen women, I was like, alcohol was involved either on my side or on her side, damn near every time, So I understood that alcohol probably played its role in our society, to go forth and get us to multiply. But it really wasn't for me. I was never really good at drinking. I found myself always either not drunk enough or like laying in the flower bushes somewhere, too drunk. So not being able to gauge that and do a good job with it. I just chalked it up to not being a good drinker. But somewhere around
so many people are able to use alcohol effectively. Just they're able to have the one or the two drinks that create a pleasant buzz, but then other people just can't seem to consume it in moderation. How about these days? Do you still drink alcohol regularly, occasionally, or what?
Maybe once in the past decade. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it. It just doesn't really have any pull on me. In fact, it probably hasn't since about 24, 25. Someone said, hey, have you ever tried smoking a joint? And I took them up on that. And the music never sounded better. You know what I mean? No one was ever any funnier than that. So I don't know. It's kind of like, where you been all my life? So from that point on, I didn't really have any yearning for alcohol at all. But, that's just like one of my regrets. I was trying to think of maybe one or two more. I quit.
But going back to the marijuana, any permanent consequences from the marijuana?
Oh, man, it promotes apathy. That's the one thing they don't put on the label, I did not realize what a go-getter was, what a go-getter I was until like after, you can go 5 or 10 years after the fact and you could measure the dude you was and you go, man, who was that guy? That guy would just crash through mountains. You know what I mean? Nothing stopped that guy. So that was the one thing that I thought the apathy that it promotes. And the other thing is short-term memory loss. Like sometimes you and I'll be talking and I'll say, or whatever, just trying to fumble for words. And that was definitely something that I didn't have to worry about with before marijuana. So, yeah, it's one of those things we did what we did, and I know Joe Rogan sometimes sounds like he's the Pied Piper of weed, but it's really not all that. If I have to compare it just to alcohol, it's 100 times better than alcohol. But does that mean I wish I didn't smoke weed all the time? No. I wish that I could do just like you're talking about. Hey, maybe go out on a Friday night and smoke a joint or something and have a good time. But it's like, what are you going to do on Saturday?
Well, I don't see marijuana as equivalent to alcohol. I think it's much more serious. I think it's much more mind-bending. I think it's much more detrimental. I've never tried it, but it seems to turn people into losers at a disproportionate rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my only saving grace is maybe being a little smarter than the average bear. Maybe that helped me out, But I could just tell you, like whenever I was 16 years old, I had time to be a budding racketeer on the side, and I was going to school and working like 4 part-time jobs at the same time. And I'm like, who was that guy? Who was that guy? You couldn't stop him. So that's the one thing, the apathy. It still makes the music sound better. They're still positive, but you got to weigh things in totality. And that was probably one of the things that was good for you that you hated at the time was that Seventh-day Adventist upbringing. But man, they are so G-rated. You didn't have a chance to go out and experience life the way I did. You know what I mean? Until sounds like 77.
Yeah, 77 when I came to America. I was 11 years of age. But I always had an instinctive loathing of both alcohol and marijuana, so I've never tried any drugs, and I've never been a drinker.
Mm-hmm. I
But
call one thing about me is at least I can recognize my demons. And for the longest, I had like what I called the 4 C's, my 4 demons, and they were cannabis, cigarettes, chocolate, and Coca-Cola. But Coca-Cola started doing that DEI stuff, so that knocked off one of the C's. And I guess just as I got older, I can chomp on a granola bar and do without chocolate per se. So I've been able to take care of that one. But the other 2, the cigarettes, not just any cigarettes, menthol cigarettes, the kind of cigarettes that a young man that attended Booker T. Washington School would smoke. And I've never been what you would call a heavy smoker, but I've never been able to give them up. But on the plus side, at 45, my 3-mile run time was 21 minutes. And when I was 18 in the Marines, my 3-mile run time was 20 minutes and 45 seconds. So I don't know that cigarettes is all that detrimental as people say, as long as you don't let them get the best of you. And next thing you know, it's a pack a day, 2 packs a day, or whatever. But
I think the marijuana is the most serious out of those 4 that you mentioned, and the other 3 much less likely to damage you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned earlier about those kids with that Israel-Palestine situation. And on one level, I think the lefties kind of did that to themselves. I think that kind of blew up in their face. Did you notice how they were constructing monsters in these universities, and all of a sudden they started sizing it up and going, "Hey, wait a minute, Israel fits the profile," And as I say that, do they know anything about T.E. Lawrence? Do they know anything about the Balfour Declaration? I would suspect not. You know what I mean? So on one hand, they know so little, but on the other hand, they were built like a little army for situations like this. And it's like the army kind of is turned on its own. Or am I reading that the wrong way? How do you see that, Luke?
Well, I saw a study recently that the average IQ of an undergraduate in the United States 30 years ago was 117, and now it's 102. So I think overall, college students have gotten much dumber. Now, there's an elite still, and so there's an elite on the pro-Palestine crowd that is highly intelligent. So I talked to some people who were on the pro-Palestine crowd, and they were as erudite and as learned as you could expect. And there are plenty of morons on the pro-Israel side as well. So if you're going to have an effective movement, you have to be able to control your morons. So the pro-Palestine crowd's getting more sophisticated. They generally had a good discipline with their morons in that they only allowed a very limited number of people to speak to the news media. And those people who did speak, they were very well trained. So in many ways, this pro-Palestine movement is becoming more effective. I think BDS movement has become effective as putting a great deal of fear into Israel and its supporters. So they are improving in some ways, and then at the same time, they shoot themselves in the foot by burning the American flag. That's not going to go over well with regular Americans.
And listening to you, it's like all roads for the Palestinians seem to lead to Hamas, and that seems to lead right back to Iran. Is that correct?
I wouldn't put it just completely definitively. Currently, Hamas is the most popular political group among Palestinians, and Hamas receives substantial aid from Iran. But I don't believe that Iran, for example, ordered the attack on October 7, but they did supply materials so that Hamas, when it wanted to go on the offensive, would have the capability.
Okay. In much the same way that America doesn't attack Russia, but they sure as hell give Ukraine all the weapons they need, right?
Yes, very similar.
Situation. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. You got any regrets you're willing to share?
Oh yeah, vegetarian. So my brother and sister, they grew out. We were all raised in a vegetarian household, but my brother and sister in their teens, they started to eat meat and to eat fish, and I never did that, and so my whole life was hobbled by my vegetarian diet, which, because I've never ventured outside of it, is now really set. I mean, my whole body reacts if I accidentally consume a little bit of fish that was, for example, on a salad that I've been eating. So that crippled my health. I was bedridden much of my 20s, and I was just weak almost all of my life. And then about 2.5 years ago, I started taking beef organ capsules, and all my health problems went away in 2 weeks. So I really strongly wish that I had not stuck with my vegetarian diet.
Now I know you Seventh-day Adventists, y'all are early to the party on the veggie links and all that kind of stuff, right? Y'all go way back to the 80s on that stuff, right?
Yeah, but a third of Seventh-day Adventists aren't strong on that. They'll still eat some meat and some fish. Unfortunately, I just kept to the strict vegetarian diet of my home, and it absolutely crippled my life.
Were you surprised when I guess the normies, you would say, seem to have rejected the Beyond Meat or whatever the crap is they were trying to get everybody by a few years ago?
Well, I'm surprised that people want to be vegetarian or certainly vegan, because it's hard for the body to assimilate B12 if you don't eat meat. And I think a vegan and a vegetarian diet is a really bad idea. We're obviously evolutionarily evolved to eat meat. And so the popularity of vegan and vegetarian diets is often promoted by fitness influencers who don't actually keep to vegetarian or vegan diets in their private lives. They will publicly espouse it. And that's same with the woman who was the principal character behind the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She promoted vegetarianism. She would write books extolling vegetarianism, but she would eat meat. And even though she was writing books extolling a teetotaler abstinence approach, she would also drink alcohol. So she pushed things that she didn't live by.
That's that Ellen White, right?
Yes, Ellen White, yeah.
And she was originally one of the Millerites from the mid-19th century?
Yes.
Isn't it weird how they just rebrand that stuff, you know? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the Mr. Kellogg's and all that gang up there in Battle Creek, weren't they Seventh-day Adventists too?
Yes. So Seventh-day Adventists have had disproportionate influence in many matters of health. And Seventh-day Adventism is one of those very rare religions that was essentially founded by a woman. And it's a highly female, feminine religion. It's still about 2/3 women, 70% women. And it has kind of a nurturing ethos to it. It's about healthy living, and health is one of those rare areas of life where women tend to be consistently better informed than men. Usually men are better informed than women, but in the area of health, women tend to be better informed. So it really does appeal to many female impulses, and there are a lot of highly attractive women in the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Right. Oh, you're saying they punch above their weight as far as good-looking guys. Okay. Yes. yeah, 10-4 on that. Yeah. I've always just kind of viewed religion in general as just kind of a programming, and I tend to just look at the end product. What's the end product doing out in the world? You know what I mean? Yeah. And when it comes to Seventh-day Adventists or Mormons, a lot of stuff like that, I end up looking at it as a positive if they come across as a positive. The only thing I used to worry about, I noticed that a lot of people that went to the Seventh-day Adventist schools, and just in general private schools, let's say from 35 years ago, boy, they would get stuck into the world, into the mainstream with the normies. And sometimes they would turn into hellions, much the way that a preacher's son does. And so when I was young, I guess I was thinking, I don't know that I would do that to my kids. I thought it would be better to have them normalized, to be subjected to the public school crowd or whatever. But looking back, I think maybe segregating them away from that shit is probably better, because it's been my opinion that one of the things that never gets talked about is what was done to the schools, and nobody ever talks about the effects of the public school. How once they integrated, how long did it take before they were almost useless and people couldn't even really trust the education they were getting from the schools anymore? That's one thing that's never talked about. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, we had a public high school on Robertson Boulevard. Name will come to me, and it was Alexander Hamilton High School, and it was very prestigious, high-achieving high school up until about the mid-1960s, because it had overwhelmingly Jewish and white students. Right, this neighborhood around it was 98% white and majority Jewish. Then they started busing in black students, and the academic standards just went to hell. You had an explosion of crime with the school busing. You had all sorts of black families moving into the neighborhood. Then you started getting gangs and drugs and crime, and the whole neighborhood changed. And then the LAPD instituted this gang restriction policies that have been replicated all around the country. They did a divider, I think, just south of 18th Street on Cadillac. They made Cadillac the divider, and they said if you're in a gang, it's illegal to congregate with any other gang member. So these border areas apparently are really important to police. If you can control the border, then you can maintain a safe neighborhood behind the border. And so the LAPD put a large number of resources into maintaining the border, I think, along Cadillac, and very strong restrictions against gang members affiliating. And at this time, about half of young black men, say between 16 and 25, were in gangs in Los Angeles. And it was very effective. But then as the Democrats took more and more control of Los Angeles politics, the policies were rescinded, and then you had an explosion of crime and murder and drug dealing and gang activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I told you before, I got thrown into a black school in 5th and 6th grade. And I mean, I remember playing football, and all the cheerleaders, all the coaches, everybody in the stands that was cheering for us, except for my mama, was all black. And that was a real culture shock. But after about, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks being in that school, I had a serious baseball card habit at the time. And I realized they love these things called Now and Later fruit chews. And I would go buy them by the case at the store, and then go into school. And I was buying them for $0.10 a piece and selling them for $0.25 a piece. And I'll be leaving out of that school in the afternoons with my pockets jingling, and I would see they would open their mouth and their tongues would be all green and purple and stuff. And I remember the feeling of being so happy, because now I could go buy 5 packs of baseball cards or whatever it was. But it was a trip, I saw how they were sexually active, the girls. It starts off really between 10 and 12 years old, Yeah. And I also saw that it is much more important to be cool than to be smart. And you'll be corrected, much the way people do in speech. The black community will try to correct their own. If somebody is getting too smart for his station, they will let him know. They'll let him know, we aim to be cool. We're not into that book stuff, So anyway, I just figured out.
I saw this teenage black boy walking home from the library carrying about 8 books, and all the other black kids were just hooting and hollering and abusing him for acting white.
Mm-hmm. And as a white guy, when you're outnumbered like that, you really you've got to actually put on what the black community calls a front, and you have to be willing to do things that are outlandish, because otherwise you'll get picked on every day. So I can remember playing basketball, and really one of the only other white dudes in my class was out there playing, and they threw the basketball in his face, and he instinctively picked up like a cinder block and threw it right on the guy's foot, and the blood just started like, kind of oozing away out of his shoe. And I was like, man, on one hand, that guy's crazy, but on the other hand, he knows he's not going to get fucked with on the Sandlot next week. They're not going to do it because they think now they know he'll go there. And it's unfortunate because I think that's a problem. I mean, because I saw, you see in the white community, I don't want to pick on the black community exclusively because I have a friend that lived in a trailer park and I see a lot of the same traits. I saw that where he lived in the trailer park. But what I noticed is in the white community, it's 1.5%, maybe 2%. And in the black community, it was like 8 to 10% that care more about the streets and, hooping it up than they cared about the schoolwork or whatever. And did you see what it did to the public schools? I guess they thought they were going to bring the black children up and maybe do something about the IQ gap. And what they did is brought everybody down. And not necessarily, I guess, not only in a way of schoolwork, but just in morality in general. The morality has just fallen, if you want to say, from 1970 to now. You've been alive that time. You know exactly what I'm talking about. At least from 77 to now, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And
right?
Why did your parents allow you to go to such a school?
Broken home, latchkey kid. I did it for a few years. I did it 5th and 6th grade. After 6th grade, you transferred to another school. It wasn't as bad, but it was still pretty bad. I got on the phone with my dad after 7th grade, and I said, Dad, I know you got another family down there in North Georgia, but I think I'm coming down to join you. You got another bedroom there for me? And he was like, sure thing. So that's how I got in, and that's how I got out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Strangely enough, after leaving that school, the next 2 schools that I went to had no black people in them. And it was actually the opposite way, where they would have like fishing lures attached to their ball caps, and crazy things, gun racks and stuff in the back of their pickup trucks. So I really went from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum with no like middle ground along the way.
Yeah, I went to a redneck public high school. So through 9th grade, I went to Seventh-day Adventist and Christian private schools. Then the first time I went to public school was in 10th grade. It was in Auburn, California, above Sacramento. And it was the first time I'd heard of the term redneck. And I think these were ancestors of Scots-Irish immigrants. And this was a whole different kind of white person. So I was used to very genteel white people who were on university campuses with my father, right? Their parents were professors, but this was a much hardcore type of white person, and it was an overwhelmingly white school, very quick to use their fists, just much less genteel than the whites that I'd known previously. But I learned very quickly that people had moved to this community to get away from blacks, and so they formed this redneck, overwhelmingly white community in white public high school.
Right. Yeah. And really, when the people in Washington, D.C. or the influential families, they know that when they're drawing up these rules and drawing up regulations, they know at the end of the day, there's a certain group of white people that are going to directly be competing with the blacks for these jobs. And other than that, it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect anybody around them, the people who are actually putting the laws in, putting the rules in, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, Kip, I got to run. Good to talk to you, man.